At 12 years old, a child's universe should be expanding. But when my son was diagnosed with brain cancer, our reality shattered into the sterile, high-stakes environment of a pediatric oncology ward. Inside those walls, the medical establishment does what it must to fight the disease, but in its clinical necessity, it attempts to define a child's existence through the language of pathology and prognosis, risking the eclipse of a vibrant spirit by the data of a diagnosis. Watching him fight for his life, I felt a primal terror that reached beyond the immediate crisis. It felt like a ghastly reflection of my own earliest severance, the profound loss of original participation I experienced during my own adoption. His physical illness acted as an external force, imposing a terrifying new reality upon him. In doing so, it tore open a long-hidden ancestral wound of identity erasure that had been quietly vibrating beneath the surface of my own life. During the long months of treatment, a hushed confession from a relative revealed a chilling pattern. Multiple aunts within my ex-wife's family had secretly lost their firstborn children to forced adoptions decades earlier. These women, like my adoptive mother, had been silenced by a rigid societal script. Their grief was unacknowledged, and their original bonds severed by a system that prioritized the preservation of hollow, state-sanctioned forms over the living truth of human connection. The sudden emergence of this suppressed history made it clear that my son's battle was not an isolated biological anomaly. We were now seeing the ripples of a structural replication of violence woven deeply into the fabric of society. This shared wound acts as an ontological fault line. It demonstrates that the trauma of dispossession does not simply vanish. It echoes across families and decades, surfacing when the next generation is at its most vulnerable. To understand the scale of a rupture as intimate as maternal separation, we have to look at human populations as complex adaptive systems. Think of a structural engineer investigating a house fire. They must use the cold laws of thermodynamics and combustion rates to explain why a building collapsed. We use the clinical vocabulary of population dynamics in the same way, not to strip subjects of their humanity, but to measure the thermodynamics of a tragedy. This formula is Hamilton's rule. It represents the invisible architecture of human love and kin-based loyalty, mapping the biological glue that binds a family together through genetic relatedness. Systemic adoption decouples child-rearing from this coefficient of relatedness. It neutralizes the biological incentive for high-cost investment in a specific lineage, severing the most fundamental biological bond our species possesses. When the biological adhesives of kinship are removed at a systemic scale, a population loses its capacity to survive acute catastrophes. What began as an intimate separation matures into a measurable loss of species-level resilience. This disruption triggers what is known as the primal wound. For an infant, the event of maternal separation is a life-threatening biophysical crisis. It induces a cascade of stress that can permanently alter the infant's stress response system. Research shows that severe environmental stress can epigenetically silence tumor-suppressing genes, such as KDM6A. When this epimutation occurs in the germline, the loss of biological protection is passed directly to the next generation. This dimmed marker travels down the lineage. The somatic tissue in descendants inherits this vulnerability, specifically in regions like the pineal gland, leaving them defenseless against malignant transformations. The tumor in my son's pineal gland, the biological seat of identity, became the physical manifestation of this cycle. The suppressed grief of the silenced aunts had literally been written into his DNA, a biological echo of a system that legally erased our origin. This model represents the orders of love. The core principle is belonging. When a member is severed through forced adoption, the system loses equilibrium. In an unconscious attempt to restore balance, subsequent generations become entangled with the excluded member, adopting their tragic fates. Seen through this lens, intergenerational illness is a biological attempt to remember. It is the body's refusal to accept the state's attempt to erase a member of the lineage. When biological severance reaches a crossover point, where up to 25% of a population is raised outside kin networks, the entire society begins to fray. the biological glue that ensures survival during resource scarcity or catastrophe is stripped away. This leads to epistemicide, the systematic destruction of biological truth, and the permanent reduction of collective species intelligence. When we lose the ability to verify our own origins, we lose our shared reality. By legally sealing birth records and executing the ego extermino, the state normalizes a sociology of absences. It creates a regime of structural invisibility that hides lethal transgenerational pathologies, leaving a population defenseless against acute genetic risks. A society that relies heavily on demographic extraction for its emotional needs is a society in terminal decay. By destroying biological truth at the source, it destroys its own biophysical bed hedging against extinction. Surviving this era of synthetic reality requires the construction of decentralized cultural firewalls. Through technologies like DNA-based recoupling, we can bypass administrative silence and reclaim our narrative sovereignty. My son's fight for breath was a brutal physical reality that demanded presence over abstraction. His courageous spirit became the anchor that pulled me deeper into my own resolve, to live a life built on conscious participation and unyielding truth. Reclaiming biological and historical truth is a fundamental evolutionary prerequisite for human continuity. Dismantling the state's silence is the only way to heal the primal wound and restore the authentic architecture of the human family.